Hello and welcome to NCAA football. And I'm John.
I'm Josh.
Bobby's not going to be here with us this week. He has family in for Thanksgiving week, and we're going to talk about the week that just passed by. Week 13 is basically a homecoming week, so most of the teams faced. They were cupcake games to make them look good in front of the home crowd, and so there wasn't really a lot of big things that happened. But let's start off, Josh, and talk about the playoff picture from last week.
Okay.
It's actually not going to come out until tomorrow, Tuesday. But let's talk about, we had the top four was Alabama, Oregon, Florida State, Mississippi State, and the two teams that were outside looking in were TCU and Ohio State.
Right.
So that picture didn't really change much.
No,
did
it didn't really change much. The only team that really struggled that week would be Florida State, and they've struggled every week. So it's not that big of a surprise.
Yeah, they've had close games every week, and this was a game that shouldn't have been a close game. We'll talk about that in a minute. But that's sort of the picture of where they were, and I don't know if they'll change them a lot from that. I don't think so. But this coming week will actually make probably a lot of potential changes.
Yeah, that's true.
Big games happening this coming week. But let's talk about, first of all, let's go to the Pac-12. The only game worthy of mention really was the USC against UCLA. But it's a pretty good rival game right there.
It is, but besides UCLA's beginning struggles, they have shown that they're probably, besides maybe Arizona State, the best team
in that
side of the conference. But they might not make it to the conference.
That's right.
Because of some other Arizona State and Arizona both. I'm pretty sure 6-1. So it's
Arizona should be able to solidify that one by winning that game.
Either one of those teams.
Yeah. So. Hundley, he had a great game again against USC.
He's a good quarterback. He can throw the ball.
It was 38-14, and really that last touchdown was just sort of tacked on at the end for USC. So it really wasn't even that close.
It was never a close ball.
No, never a close ball game. Mountain West. Let's see, when Lee Corso
and a couple others.
ESPN, they were talking about the big upset this week was going to be Wyoming over Boise State. And while it
almost happened.
They couldn't have been more wrong. Right?
No, that game ended 63-14.
Yeah, it was a Boise State shootout.
It was a good game overall for the Broncos.
Yeah, if you're a Bronco fan, it was a really good game.
That was quite the game.
Yeah, right in front of the Wyoming crowd as well.
Those 10 people who decided to show up to the game below freezing.
Okay, let's move from the Mountain West and talk about the Big 12. There were a few interesting games that occurred. The first one is interesting mainly because a new record was set. Oklahoma was at Kansas, and it was 44-7, so it was a blowout game. The game's not worth talking about. But he ran 427 yards, breaking Gordon's 407 yards of the week before.
I kind of feel bad for Gordon because this is going against Kansas. And it's kind of like...
That's a great point.
Gordon goes and does it against a ranked Nebraska team. Oklahoma does it against Kansas.
Kansas.
He got his record for 1 week, and now it's gone.
It's like, any guy worth his salt, a good running back, should be able to get that many yards against Kansas. I mean, really. And, yes, I agree. I think this is from us. We think your record is much more impressive than P. Ryan's from that week. But at the same time, P. Ryan, congratulations, 427 yards is a lot of yards to run. Oklahoma State at Baylor. Baylor once again showed that they're just tough. Oklahoma State again fairly weak anyway.
Baylor's 49-28 in the country.
Yeah.
And TCU's in the same conference, got to no conference championship game or anything.
That's right.
In that conference.
Yeah, so, we'll talk about that when we talk about next week's games as well, because there's big implications as far as which one of those is going to be on top. Kansas State at West Virginia. West Virginia, since they came out and lost to Alabama, they've had some struggles along the way. Kansas State just showed, really, Kansas State had to hold them off at the end.
Exactly.
Kansas State was taking that game, but ended up winning 26-20, even though West Virginia was trying to get back into that thing.
Kansas State isn't a bad team. They still have a good record. Only losses to Auburn and a Big 12 team, either TCU or Baylor.
They lost to...
Is it Baylor? I think they one of those two teams.
Yeah, we'll clear that up in a little bit.
In the Big 12, it's the 3 teams with 3 losses all lost to each other. The Kansas State either lost to Baylor or TCU. Baylor lost to TCU. TCU lost... No. It's confusing, but all 3 of those teams have beat each other in the conference.
Yeah.
And they all only have one loss, but we'll talk about that.
One conference loss.
Yeah.
That's right. Actually, Kansas State and TCU only have one loss for the season.
No, Baylor and TCU.
Oh, Baylor and TCU.
We're
Kansas State has 2 losses for the season. One is a conference loss. Okay, now let's move to the Big Ten, and hopefully we won't be quite as confused about that one. Really not much to be confused about in the Big Ten. Ohio State is dominant.
They're there.
Yeah. But the big games for this one were not really a big game. Wisconsin at Iowa, a fairly big one. It's a pretty good matchup. Iowa's not a bad team.
7-3 team now after that win.
So Iowa was strong, and basically Wisconsin had to hold them off and fight it. Gordon got 200 yards, and really for Gordon that put him over the 2,000-yard mark. So he's in that elite group of folks who've got more than 2,000.
He's probably second in the Heisman behind Marcus Mariota.
Yeah, and so that keeps Wisconsin still going strong there in the Big Ten. And then Minnesota at Nebraska, Minnesota shows up and says, don't forget about the Golden Gophers.
They've only had 2 losses this season, and it's Minnesota, so nobody really gives them any notice. Nebraska might have messed up and not thought they were as good as they are, or they're just good enough that they can beat Nebraska.
Yeah. And they've had strong teams in the past. Like, you go on back in the record books, and Minnesota has had some strong teams, and they're showing that they're getting up there. They really are. They're causing trouble year after year, and this year they've got a good record. They're a good team.
They are.
28-24 in that one. Okay, now let's talk about the ACC. Yes, Florida State is number 1, and like we mentioned, they just squeaked by Boston College.
Exactly.
And basically it was a field goal thing there at the end of the game, and getting that last
field goal,
Boston College missing one. Yes, and so that was a bad thing for Boston College.
Essentially, Boston College should never let them back in the game.
That's right.
That's happened multiple times.
That's happened.
State coming back.
That's sort of the story every time. And then, of course, the big story was Jameis Winston pushing the official out of the way when the clock was moving. And then, of course, the Florida State fans saying, but it's okay. It's Jameis Winston. He can do that.
He needed to throw a flag.
Oh, he needed to boot him from the game.
Jameis Winston can't touch an official.
You can't touch an official. That was, no matter how you look at it, it was wrong, and Jameis Winston should have been gone. And I guess they won't do it retroactively. They should not allow him in the next game. Okay, North Carolina at Duke. North Carolina's showing, hey, we are still a team to be talked about.
Either that or Duke showing maybe we don't have as much.
They lost to Virginia Tech the week before, and then they come in and lose to North Carolina. And lose handily to North Carolina.
It was never a game.
Virginia Tech, speaking of Virginia Tech, it's good that Bobby's not here, because Bobby would, have a bag over his head right now.
Never in my life have I seen a 0-0 game after
0-0 after 4 quarters.
4 quarters.
So they had to go in overtime. Virginia Tech lost in overtime, 6-3.
That's the most disgusting score.
That's a sad double overtime score. It is. And now Virginia Tech, once again, they've gotten themselves. This was their opportunity to solidify going into the bowl games for this long 20 whatever years that they've been in bowl games, and they've lost to Wake Forest, and now they're going to face Virginia next week, which Virginia just beat Miami, so could be that Virginia's going to beat Virginia Tech unless
Virginia Tech has beaten the better teams on their schedule.
They have.
They beat Ohio State. They beat Duke. So hey, maybe
who knows? Maybe they can pull it off. Maybe they can pull it off. Yeah. Okay. Now let's talk about the SEC. SEC, really the only big game, as far as I'm concerned, that happened in this one is what about these Arkansas? What about Arkansas?
The Razorbacks.
These guys. Oh my goodness! Come give it to the Hogs now. They come in. This is their second consecutive beating a ranked team. A ranked SEC team, which what we heard
it's a new record for a non-ranked team to beat 2 ranked teams and hold them
2 weeks in
a
row and hold them to 0 points. 30-0 over Ole Miss. That is just incredible. I mean, Ole Miss is not a pushover team, but my goodness, they couldn't do anything against Arkansas.
Arkansas won that game in every possible way.
And we did see a bad Bo show up for this one.
He got hurt.
He threw an interception.
At the beginning of the game, and he was kind of off throughout the rest of the game. Not really.
It put him out. But that's an amazing thing just to see Arkansas jumping back into this picture. And we'll talk about even implications of what that could mean for next week's games.
And maybe next year, too.
Yeah. But that's week 13, and there's a lot of interesting things that happen. But we'll be back with you to talk about week 14.